So Rachel, you're muted right now if you want to unmute to get us started.
Thanks, Jocelyn. All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Psychological First Aid virtual training. My name is Rachel Oberkhauser. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm with the Minneapolis Youth Coordinating Board. So as you know, our community has been in crisis from yet another killing of a Black man at the hands of police on our streets. And for 400 years, I've been thinking a lot about the young woman who filmed and witnessed for the world George Floyd's death. She was a high school student. I've also been just thinking a lot about the young people I saw this weekend leading protest chants, protecting our neighborhoods and cleaning up our streets. And our Indigenous, Black, Brown, and young people are carrying this burden for us. They've experienced and seen so much this past week, and all while already having been physically isolated from friends, family, teachers, and youth workers these past couple of months due to COVID. Our young people are resilient, but they're also in need of our support and solidarity and hope. So we recognize that you as mostly youth workers may be also experiencing some of these same feelings of fear or rage or grief that our young people are also feeling. So we all need to be equipped to kind of recognize these reactions to crisis exposure, not only for our young people, but also for ourselves, as this road to justice is going to be a marathon and not a sprint. So, so here's how today's going to work. I'm really grateful to have Nancy Carlson from the Minnesota Department of Health that will guide us through the psychological first aid training. We'd like to keep everyone on mute for most of the training. It's your option to completely have the video on or off. We'll have some time at the end to do some Q&A where you could, Nancy will invite you to unmute yourselves. But throughout the presentation, if you do have questions, please type them into the chat box, and I will read them out loud for Nancy. There's also an option to get a certificate of attendance for today. So if you are interested in receiving a digital copy of that, if you want to send a personal chat to Jocelyn, who is in the waving right there, and just give her your full name and email address, we'll keep track of that and be sure to email that out at a later date. So before I hand it over to Nancy, I just wanted to say thank you to my colleagues Carrie Dennison-Canine and Jocelyn Mido from Sprockets and from Ignite, who are spread this kind of training with other folks here in their networks, and thanks Carrie for hosting this on your site, so really appreciate it. Nancy, I'm going to pass it over to you.
Hi, I want to thank you all for giving up some time this afternoon to listen to me talk to you about psychological first aid. I don't know if any of you have had this training before, but it's something that will help you a little bit right now. It's not really going to, it's not going to really work on the healing part, but it's going to help in mitigating some of the stress and trauma that everybody's feeling. So next slide, please. We had to do some changing here and getting slide going. I want to just first introduce you to how psychological first aid fits into our disaster response and crisis response network. I coordinate disaster behavioral health at the Minnesota Department of Health, so that gives you a little bit of background on what I do. And when crises and disasters happen, the first thing we do is put out information. You probably have gotten crisis numbers to call or some handouts, maybe your organization has provided. If not, we've also got some that we will share with you if you're interested. The next intervention is psychological first aid. And you're going to hear today what psych first aid is, and I'm going to talk a little bit about what the next intervention is as we start moving into recovery, when things quiet down more and we want to really look more at healing. This is another intervention that we can look at to support our communities. Next slide. Okay, like I said, the first stage we do is provide information. And this handout, When Terrible Things Happen, is one that is also available for you if you're interested. But we're past that now. So the next slide. Psych first aid is really just, I would think about it like you think about physical first aid, except for it's for your emotions. It's something anybody can do. You don't have to be a mental health professional, but it is based on all of the evidence and research that we have on risk and resilience following trauma. It's used in many, many settings. In Minnesota, we've trained about 60,000 people in psychological first aid, everything from our National Guard to our hospitals to people that like you, that are community support people. It can be used by anyone. Inside we have a youth version and an adult version, and today you're kind of getting a mixture of both because you work with youth. So I've combined the two trainings into one. And it's culturally informed because we train people, and hopefully some of you after this training will feel confident enough to take these skills and maybe train some of the youth that you work with in psych first aid so they can also share it within their networks. Next slide, please. What psychological first aid is it's not mental health counseling. It's going to help you to understand people that maybe need more and need to be referred on to some mental health, some professional services, but it's not that. It's not an intervention, like I said, that you have to be a mental health professional to do. Anybody can do it. And when I say response workers here, anybody who's responding to a crisis, like all of you, are response workers in the situation that's going on right now inside our state and across our nation. Whether it's COVID or it's also the unfortunate incident of the death of an innocent Black man. It can be used after any type of traumatic event, not just disasters. Even though I work in disasters, it doesn't always have to be a typical disaster. Disaster is really, when we're talking emotions, determined by the individual of what they feel is a disaster for them. And it's really it'll help you. Like I said, it's not going to be that intervention and healing because, as I think you all know, this situation isn't over. So we really can't begin that healing process till it's over, but we want to have something that we can do to reduce that trauma and stress, to help with that recovery process, and really to reduce the impact of the trauma that's impacting everybody now, so that we can, maybe not have as many people need more professional and longer term interventions. Next slide, please. So basically, it's a stress education. I'll say this right up front. I'm going to talk about different levels of stress, but basically, this is a stress training. And I personally am very passionate about everybody getting training in stress because I don't think we do this well enough in our society. And we all deal with it. And then when we're confronted with something that's so overwhelmingly stressful as the situations that have been going on, we just don't know what to do, because we haven't been trained in how to deal with even just day-to-day stressors. So I want us to have like a definition of what stress is as we move forward. Stress is anything, good or bad, that actually puts demands upon our energy and something that makes us have to adjust our attention and how we focus and deal with our life in that situation. So it can be something great or it can be something horrible. But we're going to unfortunately focus on the trauma impacts today. Next slide, please. So this is kind of just to give you an idea of impact. When a disaster or a crisis happens, that's the red part, the large majority of the population feels some fear and distress. People that are closer to that situation are feeling some more behavioral change, and it impacts how they live their life, how they want to live their life. It's actually impacting how they function day to day. And then there's a smaller group, one more push. There's a smaller group of people that have some pre-existing mental illness, or they either have a mental health diagnosis, or they've suffered with anxiety or depression or trauma, PTSD or chronic, exposure to different traumatic events in the past, where this may be the tipping point for them. This may be something where they need some actual mental health, professional mental health support. And we want to acknowledge all of that in this training today. And I want you to know that some of the things that I'm going to talk about may trigger some emotions within you. And that's okay, because you are caring people. But then to know that if you have to leave, and even if you just want to step aside from your screen for a while and take a breath, take a break, please do that. It's really hard when you're doing a training like this virtually and I can't see the audience. But often when we do these types of training, we have people wander through the audience and kind of just be there for people to talk, especially after something traumatic like this, because it often triggers things in individuals. So just be aware that that could happen to you. Next slide, please. There's a lot of reactions that we have when we're stressed, but it's really important to realize that and it's not, we use terms like normal or common, but those words too are judgmental. People feel that if I'm not experiencing things, then am I not normal, or am I not experiencing something that's common? So now we switch to the word typical. That may get changed too. I think we all know, all of us on this call, that words have power, and how they're used and the intent they're used impacts people different ways. But right now we're using the word typical reactions to disaster or crisis trauma exposure. There's going to be, everybody will have physical reactions. You may have some of these that are on here. You may have jumpiness, breathlessness, digestive issues, fatigue, sleep disruptions, or headaches. You may have something different. I find, and this is where I want you to all think about yourself, because if nothing else, I want you to take something away from this training today, an understanding about yourself and stress. I know when I'm stressed because I wake up with my jaw aching because I grind my teeth. Think about you. What are the ones you feel? Do you feel pain inside your shoulders? Do you have, headaches? How do you carry stress physically? Because we all do, but we're all individuals, so we all carry it differently. We all have behavioral reactions also to stress. Some of us withdraw more into ourselves. Some of us go out and just are busy, so we don't have to deal with or think about what's really bothering us. Some become more clingy towards other people, and they need to know that they're not alone. Other people just, they'll self-medicate and they'll do numbing with alcohol, drugs, or sex, or gambling, or any other variety of things. We have seen in this situation, it's weird because we have kind of a tool disaster going on. We're still, COVID is not over. And we've had a lot of people where we've seen that have been, and I don't use the term social isolation, I use physical isolation. Once again, it's a word, because we may have to physically be apart from each other, but we don't have to socially be apart. It's kind of a key thing to think of when you're thinking of the emotional impact of COVID. But we've had an increase in domestic violence. We've had an increase in child abuse and things because of people's stress levels being together. Emotional, we all react differently emotionally to stress. Increases in anxiety and depression and irritability, anger, vulnerable and tearfulness. I do want to point out this anger and irritability part though, because it's really important to understand. About 50% of the population portrays themselves, other people, how do I word this? They have what you probably call resting bitch face, okay, you guys? They look like they are angry and irritable when they are stressed. That's not what they're feeling. They're feeling stressed. But what happens when you're working with a group of people, or even in your family, you're interacting with someone and you look like you're mad? Somebody else then reacts back to that. They react in anger. Well, then that person who wasn't mad before is now mad because somebody was acting angrily to them. We see this anger escalate in stressful situations, not because of people really being angry with each other, but because of their stress level and not asking each other, are you stressed? Just assuming that someone is mad. So it's something to keep in mind next time you're in a tense situation, or even now, if somebody seems angry with you, ask them if they're stressed. Because if somebody's mad at you, they're more than likely going to let you know too. So don't assume that. We all have we all have cognitive reactions to stress too, how we think about things. We may have trouble memorizing or remembering things. We may be hard to forget things. There may be images from the last few days that are very much inside our heads that we can't get rid of. There may be thoughts that keep coming up. It may be too that we just can't concentrate. We can't focus on things that we could easily focus on before. There's a reason that in disasters, and even now, something to keep in mind, we give very simple information to people if we have to give them information. One direction at a time during a stressful time or immediately after it. You would not tell somebody, you know, I want you to go to the yellow house the block down, but first you'll have to turn right at the first corner. Someone will go yes, and then they'll leave and they won't know what it is. It needs to be one direction at a time for somebody because it's too much overload. I don't care, you know, how much degrees or letters you have after your name, that's overload of information. And then we also all have spiritual reactions to stress and to things that happen in the world. I think in this current situation, some of this is hopelessness, loss of faith, you know, questioning. Our spirituality can be some of our strongest sources of support, but sometimes it can be something that when things are so overwhelming and we can't understand how they could happen, we start to question that. So just realize that these are just typical reactions that people have. And to think about how you are reacting. Sorry, next slide. It's also typical to feel shame and guilt, even if you haven't done anything, to feel those. We sometimes have shame because of, we feel like how we've acted or haven't acted. You know, maybe we should be doing something different. Or maybe decisions that we've made might have been impacting a situation. That doesn't necessarily have to be true, but we may be feeling that anyway. We may feel guilt that we have been not harmed by what's been going on, that we have been safe, that we haven't experienced some of the things that other people have. Speaking as an older white woman, I know that's one of the ones that I struggle with through a lot of this is, you know, not really being able to say that I've been inside the place that some of my, you know, colleagues and friends of color have. And survivor's guilt is very common. You know, why did this not impact me? Why am I still okay with this? So, next slide. Chats. So the other thing to keep in mind is that we also experience everything that we experience. Every single experience that we have in our life is tied to our senses. And that's why those certain things are triggered. You know, when we smell a certain smell, a certain memory comes. You know, when we hear a song on the radio, it triggers back memories for us. Tasting of food. These are important things to think about and to be aware of, especially for yourself, because you know, you probably have heard that saying, I'm more of a visual or an auditory person, you know, when they talk about learning. And while people are all a mix of everything, of all of their senses, it kind of helps you to know which one you're stronger in so that you know which ones to focus on more when you're doing some stress reduction. And we'll talk about some techniques, some simple ones later. But kind of think about this so you know which ones might work the best for you. Next slide, please. Some incidences that we are exposed to are more traumatic than others. And as a rule, something unexpected is always more traumatic. When many people die, especially kids, I usually have a picture of the 35W bridge collapse on here with the school bus hanging there on the bridge. Because I think many of us, when we think about that incident, our mind goes back to the children. You know, anything that lasts a long time, and a long time is also a very, you know, subjective thing. It just depends on how long you know things go on. We have racism's gone on for over 400 years, so it's gone on for a long time. That makes it much more traumatic to us. When we don't know what happened, that's one of the problems with COVID. Is there's so much we don't know about this disease, this virus, that it can make it more traumatic for people. When something happens near a special day, so that could be near a holiday for everybody shares, it could be a special day for the individuals involved, and anytime something impacts a large area. And when we're talking about the the racial trauma that's going on, when we're talking about the COVID that's going on, they're impacting the whole United States, and one is impacting the entire world. So they're huge. Next slide, please. Excuse me, I have allergies, so. There are also, it would be remiss of me, especially when we're talking about the recent, tragedy that's going on, to not really talk about all the layers of trauma that are involved within this. We have not only acute trauma, this incident that happened, but we also have complex trauma, traumas that have occurred that are layered upon each other for that individual, for that family, for that community, for, this whole racial group, it's just layered. We have lots of complex trauma that are going on. We have intergenerational trauma. We know that things that have not been resolved within a single generation are carried on to the next. So we have intergenerational trauma. We have historical trauma, because we have trauma that's impacted, a specific group of people, and it's really impacted them their entire lives and their family and way back in history. Next slide. And the one that we're dealing with the most, that I think is really the forefront in everybody's mind, is also now a system-induced trauma. When we have a system such as our law enforcement that is supposed to be there to protect people, but ends up inflicting trauma or re-traumatizing people, then we have a system-induced trauma. And so, like I said, I wanted to just bring this to the forefront to recognize this, because I think it's critical that we have to do that when we're even talking about reducing stress, to know that it has to be people that are on the forefront and understand the people that they're working with, to be able to provide support to them, to be able to provide even just the psychological first aid skills. Next slide, please. So the importance of doing something like psych first aid, getting this early intervention in, even though this, like I said, this situation is still evolving, is because the disaster itself, the crisis itself, is creating more trauma. It's like 3 types of trauma that are going on within this situation itself. The crisis itself, the homicide of an innocent man, the negative messages that survivors and the community are hearing from others, and perhaps talk within the community itself. There may be self-talk that's going on within the community. There often is. I don't know of any specifics to this, but a lot of times people are not happy with what they see going on, are not happy with each other and how things are moving, and they may just feel powerless. There's that sense of powerlessness that always occurs within a disaster, and is really being seen within this one. So what we really want to do when we're talking psych first aid is really also provide a positive environment that's supportive for people to be able to feel what they're feeling, but also within a safe space, so that they can be, that there's some support being given to them while they're doing that. Next slide, please. Once again, I just wanted to point out, I'm talking about a lot of the problems here, but I'll get to some possible stuff. Oh, I will try that. Sorry. I'm going to give you the slides too. I know I talk fast, so I am sorry. What puts people more at risk from actually having a more negative impact from something is how much they've been exposed to it. Obviously, the dose. We know that some people are just more vulnerable because they're in a vulnerable population. I would think so. Are we recording this?
Yep, we're
Yes.
recording it, and we'll share out the slides and the video for everyone.
All right, there you go. So being exposed to the more exposure you have, I think the world has seen the video, but if you've been down and you've been, protesting and you've been using your voice, if you live in the area and you're seeing the signs of this, all of that has made you have more dosage, a higher dosage of trauma exposure. Lack of resources. Unfortunately, this disaster, one of the things that we've been working with even just today, I'm part of our incident command structure at the Department of Health. And one of the things that we've been working on is trying to get people medications because of all the pharmacies that were closed down or burned or destroyed during some of the civil unrest that occurred. So not only were people, you know, had hard time, a lot of the people that were impacted by this may have been had some socioeconomic vulnerabilities prior to this, and maybe didn't have the transportation or access to get to grocery stores or pharmacies before this. Now it's even more difficult access to these supports are. And then also having previous trauma. You know, if you've been exposed to other things in your life, you know, this is going to exacerbate that. This is going to make this worse. It's probably going to trigger memories of some of the things you've been exposed to in the past. Next slide. So what helps? Like I said, I've talked about a lot of stuff that are going on, but I really wanted to lay that down for us to really make it, you know, just to be really open and honest in this conversation. And also I want people to think about how stress impacts you. So there are some things that we can do to reduce stress. We need to be able to look at what happened. And we need to be able to look at it without blame to ourselves and others. Now, that doesn't mean that we shouldn't have upset, that there shouldn't be action taken. That doesn't mean that there shouldn't be, you know, that blame that should be done, given to somebody, isn't given to somebody. What that means is a lot of times we get stuck in a cycle of shoulda, woulda, coulda. This circular cycle where all we're doing is focusing on our pain and our stress. And it's just making it worse. The more we think about it, the more we focus on it, the angrier we get. Taking action like you've been doing with the protesting is giving yourself a voice, which is strong, which is good. But we also need to understand what the stress that we're exposing ourselves to, what it's doing to us and how it's displaying itself. You know, what physical reactions, what emotional, what cognitive. Really start to pay attention to those. Because if you don't notice them, you're not going to take steps to reduce them. And I like to think of stress as pain. You know, I work with a lot of nurses and they talk about, you know, physical trauma a lot. And they talk about how, you know, when somebody's sick, you need to start pain medication before it gets to the highest level. You know, before it gets you, you go to the doctor, they ask you your pain level from 0 to 5. And we talk about, you know, you want to get taking a pain medicine before your pain gets to a 3. Well, we ignore stress in our society till it gets to a 5. And then using some of the stress reduction mechanisms are make it harder to reduce if we wait that long. So recognizing it is important. And then finally, what's really critical, which we all think of when we're stressed, is I'd have no control. So finding some control, feeling like we have some control over what's going on in our life. Now, we're not going to be able to change the situation, but we can have some control over how we take care of ourselves and then how we think and feel. Next slide, please. This is the adult psych first aid card. And we will get some of these out to you. I'll talk with Rachel and everyone else and we'll get some out to you later. The next slide. This is the youth one. And the youth one is much easier to see and to understand. And that's the one we're going to really kind of focus a bit on today. And frankly, it's one I use most often with community members because it's got this little teeny printing. It's just much more clear to understand what we're talking about. So the next slide, please. When we talk about psych first aid, we talk about these 4 pillars: safety, common comfort, connectiveness, and empowerment. They really aren't stepping stones that have to be run after another, but frankly, I think we all know safety has to come first, kind of like Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you don't have food, shelter, clothing, physical safety, we can't focus on anything else. So the first component of psych first aid is removing people from physical danger and meeting basic survival needs. I don't know about the rest of you, but I was just overwhelmed to see all the food that was donated, you know, to the school. And so that's what this is a picture of. And that's trying to meet some of that that basic survival needs for food for individuals. Next slide. When we're also talking about safety, we talk about making a plan. And part of Psych First Aid is not just to deal with what's going on now, but to prepare yourself for things that can happen in the future. Understanding how stress impacts you, understanding how disasters and crises might impact you, also helps you to not be as upset or taken, shocked by it in the future. So we talk about when we talk about disasters, we talk about developing a family plan. How are you going to communicate with each other? And the reason I even left this in is when some of the things got really scary this last week. And I think it would have been helpful for people. Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, Nancy, just yeah, slow down just a little bit. Thank you.
It's my problem. You've asked me before, and I apologize again. I am a fast talker. The reason I put this in is I think it's important for people to try to think about safety in a broad sense. And last week was scary for some people, I think, when the fires were going and when things were happening. Having a communication plan for how you can know where all your family's at. A place where if you had to evacuate, and I know some people did, where that was going to be, and knowing where resources were at to support you, for food, for shelter. I know one of the things that we looked at the Department of Health was trying to find people that were living, the homeless people that were living in the encampment and getting them into hotels, so they had some safety. And I know that you were all probably dealing with some of the youth that you work with inside those situations too. And I just think this is a funny little thing that often kids find interesting, the zombie picture. Next slide.
Nancy, we do have a question for you.
Yes. Okay, let me see.
Could you talk about, this was said privately, but could you talk about the difference between stress and trauma in this context?
Yes.
And are you using the terms interchangeably? Is that something we should do?
Yes and no. I'm talking more as we're moving forward, I'm talking more about traumatic stress, which is a higher level of stress than your day-to-day stress. We all suffer from stress, but when something happens, we all are exposed to traumatic stress at different levels. And you can use the skills that I'm talking about in Psych First Aid to just deal with daily stress, but really today we're focusing on more of that traumatic stress impact. So it's more of the ones that it's more of a stress level that's going to impact just your daily functioning. You're going to tell that it impacts your thoughts, how you feel, how your interactions with other individuals. So it's a more intense and more intense because you've been exposed to a situation that threatened life and safety. So that's more of a traumatic situation. And we could say that for either COVID or for the recent police homicide, I guess now we can use that term. Everyone's been exposed to that at different levels. So I know I have a mixture of people in the audience, so I don't want to, I just want to acknowledge that everyone is experiencing some level of traumatic stress.
Thanks, Nancy.
Next slide. Oh, we did. Make a kit. This could be make a disaster kit, but the way I like to use it when we're talking about psychological first aid here is everyone should make an emotional support kit for themselves. Whether that is, and we really talk with this with kids, to do an electronic one, to, put on their phone the games that they like to play that could take their mind away from other things. The music that is calming for them. Although we also talk to youth about, even though you may say the words don't matter, sometimes they really do subliminally. You're hearing them, but is it fidget toys that you need to do? Is it, give a book for, is it coloring? Is it Mandela's? Is it meditation? Is it just some different type of relaxation and mindfulness techniques? Have your own little kit, whether it's something that you actually pull out and use, or if it's something that's just virtual, or it's something that you just have developed kind of in your own little mind of what helps you to reduce stress. But also have some of these other kits for emergencies. I should add that. The most important thing of psychological first aid, the very most important skill, is common comfort. People need to know, and I don't care if you are the biggest introvert in the world, we still as a human being, each and every one of us wants to know somebody else cares. In fact, I was hazard to guess that most of you have thought at some time when you were stressed and you were really upset, the prevailing thought going through your head was, nobody cares about how I'm feeling. Nobody really understands and nobody cares what's going on with me. We all need to know that. We all need to know that somebody is there for us, that somebody's willing to just be in that space with us. You don't have to even say anything. In fact, for some people, just being with somebody, just even quietly sitting with someone, is all they need. Next slide. You are right. I'm trying to slow down. It's unfortunately not in my personal, I'm not used to that, so I have to, you are right. Somebody mentioned that I'm causing more stress by talking, and I want to not be doing that, especially when I want to say silence is okay. What we really want to do, and what people really, really need right now, is a chance to tell their story. In whatever way makes sense for them. And you'll find that when people are upset, their story doesn't start at the beginning and go nicely towards the end. It'll start in the middle. It'll hop to the end, hop to the beginning. And part of that is because people they need this time for making sense. This is sense making for them. This is time for, as they tell their story, for them to be able to to integrate and understand what occurred. And studies have shown that people may need to tell their story 15 to 20 times before they can finally accept what has happened. And if you hear a story changing, it doesn't necessarily mean that people are changing their story as much as when something happens, you get overwhelmed by the emotions of it and you can't process it all at that time. So over time, as you relax more and you start to make sense of what's going on, more details come out for you. So slight changes may occur in how you're telling your story to yourself or to someone else. Us as listeners, when we're supporting somebody, is not to ask questions when somebody's telling the story. You know, there may be times where we want to say, why did this occur? Or what was this? But the only power that the individual has really is that telling their story in their way. We can help them by letting them know that we're following that story, that we're listening to them, by asking those simple, listening questions, clarifying, making sure that we heard it correctly. It's not time for us to say, and no one wants to hear this at any time, actually, this is what I would have done, or I experienced this. This isn't about the person that's the listener. This is that time, and it may only be 5 minutes. It may only be 10, 15 minutes. It's to give that person time to let them know that somebody else cares. And I can't stress enough how rare we do this in real life. We can tell when we just don't. In real life, we just don't listen to each other. We've become a society where it's almost okay to be doing multitasking. You know, you're working on your computer and you're talking to someone. Luckily, we're not able to do driving and talking anymore on the phone, but people used to do that a lot too. Or we're shopping, we're talking. Or we're talking to somebody even face to face and we're not really listening to them. We're thinking about what we're gonna say next. The thing is, we all notice that. We all know that. We've all probably experienced somebody saying to us, "Are you listening to me?" And we've probably said that to somebody else, "Are you listening to me?" The difference is when we're in pain, it takes guts for us to reach out to somebody, to talk to them. And if we think somebody's not listening, we close down again. Or we don't reach out. We just don't do it. And then we can't process our pain. So then that stress, that pain builds up within us, and then it comes out in ways that aren't healthy to us. So when I say, remember, it's not about you, that's what that means, is really to focus your time, however much time you have, letting that other person talk or not talk, but just being with them. Next slide. Any questions on the common comfort part before I go on? I'm trying to talk slower. I know it's still not something I'm great at. Calming and relaxing is one of the things after somebody, you know, talks to you and they're able to tell you their story, or even if they don't talk and you can see that they're really stressed, you want to think about it, even for yourself, you want to be able to practice everyday stress reduction skills. And normally when I'm doing a training like this, I ask people how many people practice mindfulness, because I'm so excited that in the last 5 years, 10 years, this has really become popular among many people. And it's one of the best ways to practice stress reduction. But some of the ways are some deep breathing and muscle relaxation. And then when you get the cards that I'll be getting sent out to you, they'll also have some tips on it. So if we could go to the next slide. That got put in there, I think, not in the right spot. I'm going back to the common comfort because I think a slide, I thought it was a little bit out of place. Go to the next one. We'll get back to calm and relax more. When we're talking, back still with the common comfort, I apologize for this. A slide got stuck in there, not right. We want to make sure that we're being present with somebody. The next slide. Yes. We get past that one. This one, yes. I'm just putting you guys all over the place. The next slide. Yes. Like I said, we don't want to ask people questions. We don't want people to feel like they need to talk about things before they're ready to. That's part of the thing that makes trauma worse for individuals, is being forced to talk about something before you're ready. Now, the only difference to that, the only caveat I would give is if to get somebody to safety, you needed to get information from them, you needed to ask them, point blank information about where they were or what their experience was, that's different. But otherwise, people should be allowed to talk about their experiences on their own time frame when they feel comfortable. We know that forcing that before someone's comfortable, or in settings where they're not comfortable, with individuals that they're not comfortable just adds to the trauma. People need to feel safe when they're sharing personal experiences. Next one. Sometimes, and this has been really hard for my behavioral health therapists, is people want to say something comforting. Yes, I agree how to support people. We just had a chat from someone working in sexual assault, and that's an extremely difficult area because you have to get information for safety and during that, but yeah, we could talk offline more about that. One of the things that we struggle with too with this is people want to say something supporting to someone, want to make people say something to make someone that's gone through something difficult to make them feel better. The problem is all of these terms on the screen, you're strong enough to deal with this. You'll feel better soon. It's good that you're alive. All those are condescending to the individual, and they actually cut off conversation. Because the truth is, we don't know what somebody is feeling about their own experience themselves. And they may not be feeling any of these things. They may be feeling something that when you've said, you did everything you could, if they don't feel they did, then the conversation's done. They're not going to share with you what's going on. And they need to share. They need to talk it out to make sense making. And so we've stopped that for them. So while we may want to say something supportive, our supportive is things that we can say are, I hear what you're saying. I don't understand what you've gone through. We need to let people know that even if two people that have been through twin studies in Minnesota, we've been big on them at the U, have really found that even two twins, identical twins who have gone through the exact same situations and life experiences growing up, did not describe those experiences the same. So we're not going to know what their personal experience was or what they've gone through. So we need to just let them talk if we can. Like I said, I know there are situations where that is not possible. Next slide, please. What we can do for people, because quite often people who are highly stressed, people who have been exposed to a traumatic event, they're thinking, they're processing, but they're kind of focusing in a tunnel vision. They can't see all the broader opportunities that are available to them. So it is helpful to make suggestions to them, not to tell them what to do, but to make suggestions to them about things that might make things easier and to offer to help them with that if that's something they're interested in. We don't want to take power away from someone, even if it's just making a small choice about how to proceed. And then we also, when someone asks a question, we don't want to just give an answer unless we're going to come back. We want to be honest with everything we say. We want to be honest and say, I don't know that, if they ask something. And if we do say that we're going to go find out, which we should, if we can, we need to make sure that we get back to that individual with what we found out, whether that's a positive or a negative answer for whatever they're looking for. Because we want to be able to have that relationship of trust so they feel comfortable talking to you. The next slide. So some of the most positive things that people can do in dealing with stress is first knowing that they're not alone. They may be alone in what they've experienced, but they're not alone in that there's other people that care that they've experienced pain. We want people to not feel that they're all alone. To seek assistance is helpful. To recognize, to recognize that there can be growth out of horrible situations. We're not at that point probably inside this situation, but hopefully that's what we would want people to get to. and to use coping mechanisms, whether they're, positive eating or relaxation. And I'm going to give you a few in the next few slides, I think some simple little coping things. So go to the next slide, please. Yes. So let me see what time it is here, how much time we have. Okay. You're going to get these slides, but I wanted to give you some really simple, we don't have time to go through them today as a group. And it's hard doing this virtual one with this many people anyway. So, but I wanted to give you, I'm going to give you today 3 really simple 5-minute self-calming techniques that you can do and you should do for yourself and that you can teach others. And one of them is just a breathing one. And one of the things that's not on here, but I would recommend you maybe try, is a lot of time when we've been exposed to a really traumatic event, and this is where that term, caught your breath, comes from. We kind of hold in our breath. So sometimes it's helpful when you start a deep breathing exercise to first start slowly breathing out before you breathe in. It sets an easier rhythm, and it helps you to kind of think about getting first out, that breathing out that tension and that stress to start with. So I would recommend that you practice this one. And I have another one. Next slide. I don't have time to go through them. Mindfulness, all the mindfulness techniques that are out there. I can't stress enough, there's been hordes and hordes of research out there on how mindfulness and mindfulness activities really help you to reduce stress. So it doesn't have to be meditation itself, although meditation is a great practice to take up. Mindfulness is just being in the moment. If you just think of mindfulness of just being in the moment, 5 minutes, be aware of what you're doing. If it's just taking a quick walk, thinking about how the air feels on you, just don't focus on anything but the walk itself and the environment around you. And you will feel refreshed. And the same thing can be for, like I was talking about your senses, same thing can be with a snack. There's been a lot of studies on using like grapes, frozen grapes, and letting that texture, or using chocolate. So people that would enjoy doing that more than a walk is an option. The next slide, please.
Nancy, we just have a quick question.
Yes.
Go to the next slide. So someone asked if we are supporting someone processing a traumatic stress incident, is there any point that we would recommend calming strategies? How do you help someone that is processing with these calming strategies? Does that make sense?
Yes, I would breathe with them. I would go back to the one we were talking about before, and I would say, let's breathe. And I would do it with them. I would walk them through just breathing with them for a few minutes, because the one that works the best is the breathing. We don't have to think about breathing for us to breathe, but the fact that we can control it means that it automatically does different things to calm our body and our mind. If we focus on our breathing, we can calm a rapid heartbeat. We can slow down a pulse that's going too fast. We can reduce some of the tension that we're holding in our body when we're doing that. And if at the same time we're thinking about how our breath feels going out and in our body, then we can slow racing thoughts and the tensions that are going there. So yes, that's the one that I've always been told, and that I found when I'm dealing with people that are highly traumatized, is the breathing technique. It's hard. I mean, the other ones are great, but they're not really going to work inside that situation probably.
Just to follow up, Nancy, is there like a quote unquote best time in that active listening conversation to suggest that? Do you have a recommendation on that?
This is the thing, like I said, the only thing with psych first aid strategies, and their strategies, are safeties first. So really it depends upon when you know, if you're dealing with somebody and they are so upset that you can't talk to them, I would breathe with them right away. You know, once you know they're safe in a hospital and they feel like they're safe, you know, and maybe you need to breathe with them for them to feel safe and calm down enough for you to talk to them. So it really, you have to be in the situation, because I know that each situation of an individual that you're with is probably somewhat different depending upon the trauma they experienced and the individual themselves. So you, as the sexual assault advocate, would probably know the best time to do it. So there's not an evidence-based one. It's when you feel it's necessary. And maybe it's a few times. This is another one that I wanted to give people because I wanted some that scanned different parts of your senses. And this is one too that it kind of takes the breathing one to the next step, because it allows you to kind of do, and this is what I would also recommend once you've got some trust, you know, made and someone's comfortable doing a breathing exercise. This is one that might also help a sexual assault victim. Not right away, but maybe at the end or as you're maybe at a second meeting or something, for them to really work on. We tend to hold pain, especially, there's a lot of research on racial trauma too, on being held inside the body. And I wanted to add in one that not only was breathing doing, but you're also focusing on where in your body as you're thinking about this. I really wish we had more time to go through these, but as you're breathing, I would start just like very comfortable. You can lie on the floor with this one even, and just totally relax and slowly scan from your feet, feeling warmth and heat. You can visualize at the same time if you have a happy place. Sometimes people have a warm vacation place, or they think about walking in warm sand or the sun just on them, and kind of just slowly scan up through your body. You know, from your feet to your calves and your knee up. Yeah, this is what like I said, I wish we had more time, but I want to get to the other slides too and not be cognizant of your time. But this is what I would think might be good. Like I said, if you get a chance to do a second meeting with a sexual assault victim. Next slide, please. The other part, another part of Psych First Aid is connecting and checking in with people. And just, so Psych First Aid, it's not just a one-shot time. It's also, if you listen to somebody's story, it's going back and going to them, you know, and connecting back in. How are you doing? You know, do you need to talk more? You know, or do you just need somebody to be with you? And making sure that they're hooked into services if they need to be, you know. They may not feel the trust the first time that you're talking with them to even let you know some of the things they need. So this is kind of just that checking back and connecting in. The next one. And I strongly recommend buddying up. And I talk about this a little bit later, but I probably won't get to all of the slides I'm looking and thinking. But I think it's important for everybody that's dealing with trauma, and all of you that are supporting people that are dealing with trauma, that are also dealing with trauma yourself, because we've got this immense layer of it going on, is to have somebody else, to have somebody there that knows what your experience is. So it's important for people that have been exposed to trauma. This is where that whole support group concept comes from. Somebody else who understands what you've been through, you can share your story with more. You feel more comfortable doing that. You don't have to explain why you're feeling the way you feel. It's the same for all of you. You need to have somebody else that is also working with people, so that's been in the position you're in, to share what you're experiencing. We all need that, because if you go and you try to talk to somebody who hasn't experienced what you have, it could end up, they may be supportive, but they're not going to be able to support you in the way that you need to be, because they just won't understand why you're feeling what you're feeling. And you may have already experienced this if you've been talking to other people outside of Minnesota. about what's been going on, and they don't understand, they may not understand what you're going through because they haven't experienced the same thing. The next slide. One of the things I want you to when you're connecting with people is also to look for people that may need to be referred to a mental health professional. Like I said, you don't need to be one to do psych first aid, but we do want to make sure that the people that are overly stressed, if they have this glassy-eyed look, if they don't seem to be oriented to time and place, or they're uncontrollably emotional, that we get them hooked, or they're saying, and I think go to the next slide, if they're talking about harm to themselves or others, we want to make sure that they get help. We want to make sure that they immediately get help. And in Minnesota, we have the Text for Lifeline too, that some people are much more comfortable texting and asking for help. And so you can text for help. We also have, if you need to talk to a mental health professional and someone wants to talk more, we also have the Disaster Distress Helpline, which is manned with mental health professionals. That's available 24/7. And they also have access to multiple languages. You're going to get these slides. I'm going to try to go through them.
Nancy, quick question. I'm
Yeah.
wondering if is there a difference between how you might support like a elementary age young person versus like a 16 to 18-year-old?
Yes. An elementary age kid youth will, well, obviously if somebody is talking about harming themselves, we still want to get them help, and we would talk to their, obviously in elementary, we'd be working through their parents and their caregiver too. I mean, not that we wouldn't do that with the teen, but with the teen, we'd probably more directly talk with the teen too about what's going on. But with a younger person, we'd obviously be going through their parents. And then we would recommend that with any of these, we may, if they're already seeing a therapist or a counselor, we'd want them to connect with those too. And I have some Minnesota crisis line numbers later back here that people can use to if they have youth that they work with that aren't hooked with services, or families that might be interested too, and how they can hook with some things if they need to for support. But yeah, the younger, we're definitely talking more, we're talking to the youth, but we're also talking more to their caregiver just because of the age involved and the, just because of the age involved inside of that. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Nancy. And I think we're also just thinking generally, not just specific to self-harm, but in general, if there are different strategies you would use with younger children.
I would use the same, if we're talking psych first aid, I use the same strategies with younger kids that they need to connect. They would need the calming and listening. They would the exact same skills, but we might do them differently. A lot of times when I talk to kids about calming strategies, the younger children, we'll do a couple of different things. We put up like a paper on a board and with a body just of like a gingerbread type of man outlook, and ask kids, can you draw a picture of where you hurt? Or we've talked about how even animals, when they're stressed, react to it. Turtles will go in their shell and some animals will start to shake, and we all do. So it's just how we describe stress and the reactions to more normalize that, and to encourage them to talk about it, and to encourage them to talk about what they're feeling. Does that answer that better?
Yeah, I think so. I think throughout the presentation, if there are differences between younger children and young adults, that would be helpful. Thanks, Nancy.
Yeah, and if someone's interested and they're working with a specific age group, I have materials. They can contact me, my contact information, and I can send out specific age-appropriate materials for different groups. So those are available. One of the things that we just also want to remind youth and adults, all of us, is how we think about something shapes how we feel. So one of the things that we really try to work on is really pushing thinking positive and that empowerment of what's going on. Instead of thinking this is really bothering me, think of, okay, I can handle this part of what's going on. Even if you have to chunk it out into parts that you can deal with now, that helps. Because to really kind of understand that when we're stressed, our body goes into, when I talk with little kids, and now our body goes into this danger signal, and we start to, even just thinking about something stressful, gets all those stress hormones going through our body. It automatically triggers it, whether we're whether we're actually in a stressful situation or not. Just thinking about it recreates it. So being aware of that a power of our mind can also calm us if we start practicing calming techniques. Next slide. Okay, so we all need to just have a break. We all need to know that we'll learn and grow from things that we've gone, and that accepting guidance and accepting help, and kids of all ages are much better at this than we as adults. They're much better at asking for help. They're much better at accepting guidance. We can actually learn from them with this, because we've kind of become a society that still has a lot of stigma with emotional reactions to things. And if we can stop that in youth of all ages, we'll be better off. But I want to get on to some self-care things for you guys. So if you can move to the next slide. This is just taking action and doing stress reduction. And we kind of talked about this already. So, and I know I'm going through, but I think I've already gone over my time, and I want to, yes. So if we get to the next slide, please. I wanted to, a couple things I want to let you know. Absolutely is right now, like I said, psych first aid is really for right now, dealing with reducing the trauma for what's going on now. For many people, it will be enough. For probably a large group of people, because we've had such a traumatic situation, and we've also got, like I said, COVID going on, and who knows what else will also be going on during this, that has made this a very unusual situation. So it may not be enough. Next slide. What we have is something we can do a training on later on, and I'd like some of you to think about if this is something you'd be interested in, is skills for psychological recovery. And it actually is a 2-day training, though. I want you to know that. But it works on the next slide. It also, you don't have to be a mental health professional. It's like PFA. But what it does is it looks at helping people address these areas. Under processing information and setting priorities, problem solving, picking and managing positive activities, managing reactions, healthy thinking and helpful thinking, and rebuilding healthy social connections. These are the skills that get impacted when we have, when we're dealing with trauma, when we're dealing with stress. And these are all skills that probably any child, and probably most of the adults I know, actually could use some help with. So let me know if that's something you'd be interested in the future, any of you, please. Next slide. Just want to quickly go over you. I know people have to go, and I appreciate immensely any of you that have stayed on for this, because I've taken much more of your time than I meant to. But I want to leave you with some things to think. Take care of yourself. You're all vital. You're vital to your loved ones, but you're also vital to the youth you take care of, your communities, and you need to take care of yourself. So you need to understand that you're at risk of compassion fatigue. Next slide. I think this is something I just want you to take with you today too. The expectation that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. We know we choose to do things, we choose to do the work we do because we care. Because we care, we're impacted by it. It's a double-edged sword. Next slide, please. You're experiencing probably burnout and some secondary trauma because you're hearing the stories of others. That's compassion fatigue. I know people are leaving, so I'm just basically going over this just quickly. Next slide, please. Some of these things, you're going to get these handouts, but I just want you to know these are some of the signs of compassion fatigue. Some of you may be experiencing these now. You're going to get the slide, so next slide, please. You need to know that you are not responsible for everything that happens. There's many, many things that are out of your control. You probably have told yourselves this, but I'm another person telling you this now. The need will always be greater than the resources that are out there. So you have to take care of yourself. You have to take care of yourself so that you can help others. I have a couple of resources here that I want you to check out that help you manage your compassion fatigue. Next slide. And you should have a buddy system. Just flipping through these really quick because a lot of people are going. These are the other numbers I told you. There's the crisis line Minnesota. These the adult mental health crisis lines. Next slide. I have, if you're interested in learning more or even sharing more about just our basic psych first aid, which doesn't talk as much about trauma, we have our online videos that we developed with the University of Minnesota. This is my webpage. Feel free to go check it out. And I'll take it. I've got, if anybody stays and has more questions, I will take those questions now. Otherwise, I thank you all so much for putting up with my fast talk and my overlong conversation.
Thank you, Nancy. Yeah, we're scheduled to 4:30, so you're good. We've still got about 10-15 minutes. So
Good.
yeah, I welcome if people have questions for Nancy about any specifics, please stay on and put your question in the chat. And as we mentioned, we'll get the recording and the slides out to everybody here in the next day or two. It also sounds like there's some interest in that training that you mentioned, Nancy. So we'll be sure to get information about whenever you're doing the next one out to this group.
And just a quick note about certificates. So everyone who did message me, I do have it recorded, but yeah, give me a couple of days to make sure that we get all of your names on those. And so, Jane, I see that you mentioned it. We have a couple Janes, but in the chat, so I'll make sure to add yours as well.
Great. Well, we'll hang on here for a few more minutes if folks have questions.
Wonderful. All of you that have asked for training, we'll get a list together somehow, and as long as I have a way of some of you to get back to, we'll do that.
Carrie, I see you asked a question about whether it would be offered to public or private schools. I mean, this is something that Nancy does, and we requested it, and she was gracious enough to do it for our community. So I think if it's something that you're interested in, Nancy, how would you recommend she do that?
We've actually talked to, I mean, this is actually, I've been talking to the Department of Education. There is actually, when we look at the SPR training that I was talking about, there's actually a version for schools that we would love to do for schools as they come back. And we've been training Minneapolis schools. They are looking at training, I've trained all of the school counselors and the therapists there, and I know that they're thinking about training some peers, some youth peers inside the psych first aid training too. So we will figure out if we haven't done it for your school, if you're interested, we'll do it, or we'll figure out how we can get you hooked in with people who I have different trainers at different places too that maybe could do that. But we'll get it for you.
Nancy, there's a question if the psychological first aid help cards are editable. They wanted to maybe do something specific for their school.
They are not. We can give you the PDF, and if you can figure out how to do something to a PDF and make it editable, you can. Otherwise, what I have is the Psych First Aid cards are hard cards that hook on your ID badges. And so, they're like about this big and they hook onto a badge. But I also said, I also have PDF on the youth one too. So I also have PDFs of it that maybe you can. I don't have that technology ability.
And Nancy, do they come in multiple languages at all?
They do not. A dream of mine to have everything in multiple languages. As some of you may not be surprised, I'm a staff of one with no budget, so.
How would you suggest that if people wanted a physical card?
Then let me know if we can get a name and if I have to have an address, a name and an address to mail things to.
So how about I do this? I will.
And if you're at a business, if you're at an organization and there's more than one, well, you're not at home now anyway. Yeah, a name and an address.
Yeah, so I just put up Nancy's contact information on the slide. So I would, if you want a physical card, I would go ahead and record Nancy's contact information down and send her an email with the address that you'd prefer her to send that to.
Yeah.
Any other questions for Nancy while she's here? Okay, well, seeing no additional questions, we'll just hang out here for a few more minutes. But again, please let Jocelyn know if you want a certificate attendance. Otherwise, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. And I'm just wishing you all safety and hope and yeah, hope that you all feel taken care of and are have support systems where you are. So we'll sign off for today and be sure to get you the link to resources that Nancy shared, as well as the PowerPoint and the recording. So thanks so much, everyone.
Thank you.